Have you ever had the scenario happen in your life where you know what you wanted, maybe even you knew exactly what you needed, and you knew how to get it, but there was always someone or something that always seemed to step in front of you or stop you from getting what you needed? You ever experienced that? On a big scale, little scale, anything like that? All right, 3 of you. Okay. Well, for the rest, I'm sorry, this example is not going to hit you very good, but I kind of imagine, even when we can't think of that instance right now, that many of us could share all kinds of stories relating to this type of scenario. Now, I stumbled across this video recently, and it's funny because I sent it to my wife, and she was like, "Oh yeah, it's good to see this oldie but goodie." And I looked, and it came out in 2020. So I guess oldie is 3 years, but I know that's how technology works, and I'm apparently getting to the place in my age where I'm catching up to everyone else on this. But there's a video of Chef Cade, and he knows what he wants. And so we're going to watch this video of him trying to get that.
No eating the butter, though, okay? Okay. Good job, Cade. Cade, we have tons of butter. A cup of sugar, okay? Put it over. Right. Wait, Kate. What's next? After the sugar. Oh, jeez. It has to be packed in there, so put it in. Don't eat the brown sugar. Oh my gosh, no. Crack and put it in. Oh, yep. No, we don't eat. What? No, we're not eating flour. Okay. 3. Turn it off for now and then turn it back on when we get a batch out of the oven. I never could do that. Oh!
Man, Cade is a menace. He's tenacious. He knows what he wanted in each of those situations. I mean, what a cute kid, right? He gets away with it. I always joked with our kids when they were young, good thing they're cute, because otherwise we might, do something about that. But the funny thing, I think, in the situation of Cade was that he wanted each ingredient, and he was quick in trying each of them. That wasn't the full video. If you're interested in it, there's a 3-minute version of that, where he's just grabbing everything, and he tastes flour, and he makes it grow his face. But he just keeps tasting everything. But he wanted to taste each ingredient, and it was a bunch of stuff that his grandmother wanted to give him in a much better completed version in a cookie. It's one thing when you're a kid and you can't seem to ignore your impulses, you just respond to them, but what about as you grow older? Today we're actually going to be in the first book of the Bible, which is called Genesis, if you weren't aware of that, or just to remind you. And we're going to be in the 32nd chapter, if you want to turn there or tap there, if you have an app. But just a little backstory on what's happening is we have one of the patriarchs of the Jewish faith, Jacob. And his backstory is that he's the son of Isaac and Rebekah. And Isaac was the promised delivered son of Abraham. And so he's the 3rd generation of that. Now, back in Genesis 25, which we're not going to spend time in that, I'm just going to kind of recap what happened there. Rebekah becomes pregnant, and it's with twins, she finds out. But the twins in her womb are kind of jostling or wrestling or just kind of at odds with one another. And in a prayer, she asks, God, why is this happening to me? And so God responds and says in verse 23, and says, and the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become 2 nations. From the very beginning, the 2 nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. At their birth, Esau was born first, and Jacob, who was the second born. So Jacob was given the promise. God had told his mother that something that wasn't normal in that culture of that day. It's that the younger son would be served by the older son. That's a flip script from the norm of that day and age. That was pronounced by God, their creator, over his life before he was ever born. Now you fast forward a couple years in the story of Jacob and his life, and you have these 2 men that were just completely different. You have Esau, who was kind of a man's man. He loved being outdoors. He was really hairy. He hunts and he works out a lot. He took a lot of selfies, probably with his shirt off, just to show his muscles. That's the kind of man that Esau was. he probably drives like a lifted truck, especially with a diesel engine, and he loved just to take off and get that black plume of smoke, that diesel drivers like to kind of leave behind for everybody to smell. And then you have Jacob. He liked to stay indoors. He didn't have a lot of hair. He would have said he was smooth-skinned, which I don't know why we needed that detail, but it's there. He was close to his mom. He, I think, probably wore a fedora. He drank pour-over coffee only. He liked to cook, and I think he probably drove a Vespa scooter around town. Nothing wrong with that, but I think that maybe that's how Jacob lived. But one day, Esau, the outdoorsman, comes and he's absolutely famished. He smells some of the stew that Jacob is making, and Esau says, I just have to have some. I'm about to die. I'm starving. He's like, give me some of the stew. And so Jacob sees his opportunity, and he agrees on the condition that Esau will give his rights as a firstborn to Jacob in exchange for the food. He's saying, if you give me your birthright, it was called, if you give me the birthright, then I will give you this stew. Esau says, what good is my birthright to me if I starve to death? Here, have it. Give me that stew right now. Remember, though, even in light of that story, God had already promised before Jacob was ever born that he would be in a position for his brother to serve him. But Jacob saw an opportunity in the moment, and like Cade grabbing at a stick of butter, Jacob grasped at what he wanted, the birthright. Now, a few years later, their father Isaac is declining in health, and he's getting to the point he can't see very well, and he's on basically what will become his deathbed. And so Rebekah, the mother, she hatches this plan with Jacob that, hey, why don't you pretend to be Esau and go in there and receive the blessing of the firstborn? See, there's birthright and there's the blessing from the father. And so this time he's going to get the blessing from the father. Really, Jacob was mommy's special boy. And so she hatched with him to go in there and get that. And so he goes in there acting like Esau, and he gets the blessing from Isaac. Remember, though, God had promised before he was ever born that Jacob would be served by Esau. But in the midst of what's going on, Jacob sees an opportunity, and like Cade grabbing those raw eggs, Jacob grabs a hold of what he wanted to make sure it happened. Jacob was laser focused on things that he wanted, and he took every opportunity to scheme and deceive to get to them. He didn't wait for them to come to him. He made sure that he took matters in his own hand. He wanted a wife. Her name was Rachel, and so he schemed a way to get her. Now, when her father tricked him and he ended up marrying 3 other wives first, every time Jacob came up with another plan. And finally, he gets to marry Rachel. And what happens? He comes up with a plan on how to leave with some of the wealth. It took him 20 years total. But he finally was on his way home with his wife, plus 3 others that he wanted, plus some wealth and just a different way of life. Now, what's interesting is as he goes to go back home, he begins to worry that maybe 20 years wasn't enough time for Esau to cool off from him stealing his birthright and his blessing. And so as he approaches his brother, where his brother Esau lives, we find him in chapter 32, beginning in verse 9, when he starts to pray to God. And here's what we read. Then Jacob prayed, "O God, my grandfather Abraham." Let me start again. "O God of my grandfather Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me, return to your land and to your relatives, and you promised me, I will treat you kindly. I'm not worthy of all the unfailing love and faithfulness you have shown me, your servant. When I left home and crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing except a walking stick. Now my household fills 2 large camps. O Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I'm afraid that he's coming to attack me along with my wives and children." I think what's interesting in that prayer is Jacob acknowledges the promise to his family, and he acknowledges God's kind of material blessings on his life, but he requests God's protection now that he has all of this stuff from the brother that he had taken advantage of those many years ago. I think sometimes our lives can look a little bit like Jacob's. Now, I'm sure you don't have 4 wives. If you do, we probably need to have a talk. But you probably don't have that many wives or spouses in general. You don't have a bunch of flock of animals. Maybe you do. Maybe you're a farmer. But more to the fact of where through a series of events, we see opportunities to grasp for and grab a hold of what we want and maybe even what we need. But because we maybe didn't do it on the up and up, or maybe we had to step over someone to get to it, or maybe even step on someone to get there. And although we weren't super interested in hearing from God when we got a hold of what we wanted, we are super interested when the potential for the mess we cause comes to a head and we're saying, God, please help me. Please protect me. Jacob then sends his gifts ahead of him, and he actually sends his wives and his children ahead of him too, and he stays back alone. I don't know if he was sending them thinking like, I don't know, it's not a good look though, really, is it? I mean, anyway, he's home alone, or he's back alone, and we pick this up for an interesting turn in verse 24 in the same chapter. A man came and wrestled with him being Jacob, until dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, your name will be Israel, because you have wrestled or fought with God. This mysterious man shows up while Jacob is alone. And it's like we get no recording of an interaction before that. They just immediately start wrestling. He wounds Jacob, but Jacob clings to him and says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Back in 2014, it's been a while now, my family was blessed with our second daughter. Her name is Evangeline Ann, or Evie as most know her. And she came into the world like a bolt of lightning. Although we've been used to her mild-mannered, always smiling older sister, Annalise, Evie was another story. Annalise used to try to give baby Evie, she called her baby Evie because she couldn't say the EV, but she would try to give baby Evie snuggles on the face. She'd try to snuggle her and say, I love you so much. Evie would grab her hair and hold on until she pulled it out by the root. Annalise stopped trying to give Evie hugs, and still to this day is a little gun-shy about any kind of close contact with Evie these years later. Evie would bite, smack, and pinch her mom while crying and screaming for even more when there was no more. We came to affectionately call her Evie Bear because she was like an angry bear a lot of the time in her first year and a half. Fast forward to her 2s, her 3s, and her 4s, and it became clear she was not going to be one that would back down easily. Where Annalise generally wanted to comply with us, and she didn't like when people were upset at her, Evie didn't care. If you raised your voice at Evie would raise her voice even louder. I'll be honest. I thought I was super parent when Annalise was just the smiley, happiest kid ever. I thought, man, this parenting thing, this is just easy. We are such good parents. Look at Annalise. And then came Evie, and I thought, I don't know anything. I didn't know what to do. It was day after day of just fighting with her about stuff, and she could not understand that we loved her when she heard the word no. One night, in the midst of just encountering this immovable force, she angrily screamed and cried, and she would stand real rigid with her body with all of her might, not recognizing that the boundaries I was setting for her were actually for her good. I remember scooping up that little 4-year-old, and I held her close and began rocking her. And she was as stiff as a board for about 20 seconds and tried to push off and say, no! And this rigid, defiant, angry bear of a girl melted and turned into a snuggly, crying, loving, tired girl. What she wasn't hearing or experiencing in my saying no to more cookies, to a bedtime, was love. She wasn't hearing that. She was hearing, you don't love me. And even though it was my motivation to show her love, she didn't feel that. Saying yes was how she wanted to experience love. She wanted people to say yes to her. She wanted everyone to say yes to her. She wanted her way, like every kid and a lot of adults. But we didn't just let her do whatever she wanted, because what she wanted wasn't always good for her. To be honest, Evie was her own barrier to experiencing love in those moments when she was Evie Bear. It's hard to love somebody when they're hitting you and screaming at you and telling you how much they don't want you around. I wanted to give her love and affection, but she translated no as I don't love you. When I scooped her up, though, she experienced love in a different way, and it disarmed her. I can look back and I can imagine the picture of the exact day that happened for the first time, and it wasn't forever, like immediate, that kind of thing, but over time. If you meet Evie now, she'll have moments of Evie Bear where it'll come out, but that's not the norm. Evie was fighting for the very love her mom and I desperately wanted to give her, and that's exactly what Jacob is doing here when he wrestles with God. God wanted to give him the blessing. He had pronounced it over his life before he was ever born, but Jacob can't stop fighting for it on his own. He demands a blessing that God had already said he was going to give him. And he desires to give it to him. And just like he wrestled with his brother in the womb, and just like he schemed with his father-in-law, his own father, and then his father-in-law, Jacob now wrestled with God. He was hanging on, fighting for a blessing that God had promised to give him all along. I don't know that anyone would have called him Jacob Bear in the moments of this wrestling or the way that he worked, but after this, no one would ever call him Jacob. From now on, he and all of his descendants would be known as Israel, the one who wrestles with God. Now, Jacob, now Israel, his life forever changed, and even his continence and his character. He had a kind of a moral change at that time and point. But you think about that there are people that are known for wrestling with God. And it wasn't like they were just engaging in good wrestling with faith. It was that they were wrestling like Jacob for the blessing he had already promised them, except they wanted the blessing on their own terms. The character of Israel, the man, changes forever from that point forward. And he's no longer a deceiver. And so we see that change. But as you read through the Old Testament, what you find is a people that continually want a blessing and try to take it their own way. The problem is they cannot get out of their own way as they try to get the blessing. Like Jacob, they scheme, they plot, and they try to grab a hold of what they think they will experience the most blessing in, through wealth, through power, and even through ways of love. But they go about it in their own way. Meanwhile, God is saying that God is there the whole time saying, I have all you need right here. Now, I know he wasn't the first one to sing the song, but it reminds me a lot of Eddie Murphy pretending to be Buckwheat singing Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. Some of you know that reference and some of you don't, either because you're young or because you don't watch that kind of stuff. But looking for love in all the wrong places is what the people of God typically do and what people in life do. The blessed life that Jacob wanted is only truly possible through God. And instead of believing God to know best, despite his creation of Jacob and the world, he tries to grab a hold of it, and he keeps running into problem after problem after problem that always keeps it just out of reach. Like Cade the baker, who just wants to taste the goodness of cookies, but can't stop his impulse to see if he can shortcut it by just tasting the ingredients. Or it's a lot like my Evie Bear, who hid wanting to feel love. She didn't know she wanted to feel love, but she hid it in a package of angry defiance to hearing the word no. When we attempt on our own to be filled with the love and the goodness of God, we will never fully experience it on our own. Or to put it another way, we cannot find what only God can deliver in something other than God. So much of our pain and our trouble in life, I believe, comes from the brokenness of creation due to sin in general. A lot of it's not our fault. It's just life, man. Life hits you. Sometimes whether you've done something or not. But a lot of our pain and trouble as well comes from trying to grab and hold what we think will fill the holes in our life that can only be filled by God. The script for Jacob's life is finally flipped as he becomes Israel. And he enters into the blessed life by way of God's way. He finally relents and goes God's way, now with a limp. Instead of grabbing what he thought would bless his life, he let the creator of life bring the blessing to him. What a change in approach. That God, who created him and loved him more than anything else, that knew him better than and knew the ways of the world and creation and the way that he was designed, that God would actually bring the blessing to him. Now, he was injured in the process, and he was humbled by always having to walk with a limp, but it reminded him of where true blessing comes from. I imagine that every time he got up with a walking stick and had to use it as he walked, it reminded him of that wrestling day with God. Friends, you and I have something deep within inside of us that tells us that there is something more to life than what we see. That tells us there must be something more out there. And a lot of us go and we chase it in different ways. A lot of us, myself included, I can tell you my whole backstory. We don't have time for that, and it may bore you to tears, so I won't. But it's one of those things where we're always chasing what only God can give us at the root of it all. Now, it can work itself out in different ways, but generally that feeling we have inside that we're trying to take care of is something that is saying there is more than what I've experienced. And I believe that's only from God. Now, our culture and our world around us will tell us it's found in love, it's found in wealth, it's found in power, it's found in being yourself, whoever you define that to be. It's found in what you achieve. It's found in this place with that person or this thing. And we've got to grasp for it. We got to seize it and gather as much as we possibly can by any means we can to get there. Now, sometimes people caught up in that life, they'll come back and they'll check on God and think we have to wrestle with him to bless us, saying, my life's pretty good, but I want to make sure that me and God are on good terms. And so we come back and we think we got to kind of wrestle with him a little bit. We have to go through this checklist. We have to say, okay, what hoops do I have to go through so me and God are good? Almost like, what do I have to do so that God will owe me a blessing? We try to give God a debt of love where he has to give us love, wealth, or power because we've jumped through the certain hoops. And some of us approach God that way. But God has a blessing that he already wants to give to you and to me. Actually, he is already making it available to us, and that's his love displayed through Jesus Christ, readily available to you and me through his Holy Spirit. While we're back here spinning our wheels, he's saying through creation and through his written word and through his living word, Jesus, over here. Here's really what you need. Come to me, and I will give it to you. Come to me. Stop going your own way and go the way of me. I created you to trust me, to know what's best for you. And that blessing can be summed up like this. The blessing is him. God is the blessing. His presence, his unity with us, his forgiveness, his righteousness, his adoption, his great love, and his great grace. Those are all characteristics of him. He is the blessing. We can experience it without wrestling because of Jesus Christ. But we have to stop trying to get the blessing by doing what is right in our own eyes, by achieving it our own way. By trying to get the approval of our parents or somebody else, because sometimes people spend their whole life, and you get down to the core of it, what they're saying is, I never felt like my dad, or I never felt like my mom really like I ever did enough. And so I'm proving to them that I can do enough. And really what's rooted in that is I want to be accepted and I want to be loved. And so I can stand here and say, I hope your parents weren't like that. But if they were, don't worry. Because whatever they gonna give you, Jesus will. And whatever they were going to give you or should have given you was a model to point to God and what He will give you and so much more. When you wake up before you do anything, His mercies are new and He loves you and He approves of you just when you wake up without you doing anything except for turning towards Him. And so that's the great decision. Will we stop trying to get it by doing what's right in our own eyes? Or will we instead just follow Him and saying, bring it to me, show me, let me experience it through you? How much of our time is spent trying to earn or scheme our way to a blessing that God is already offering us in Jesus? James said it this way in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want, not because you don't win the war, but because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. That's what we're talking about here. Our desires are attempts to medicate the pain of life, attempting to replace the need we have for the love and presence of Jesus with a blessing that we might find somewhere else because we think it's just too hard. We're looking for love in all the wrong places when the creator of love is right in front of us saying, come to me and I will give you rest. Come and see that I am good. Come and be made whole in me. We try to get it all the wrong ways when God has sent His Son to bring it to us. Now today we're actually participating in the sacrament of communion, and in the past we've kind of handed out as people have walked in, at least since I've been here last year. But today we're going to do it a little different because I want us to reflect. Communion is special for a lot of different reasons. But one is because we can be reminded to experience the blessing we were designed for. And that is the blessed life united with God through Jesus, through forgiveness and new life. And so when we partake of the elements, what we're saying is, thank you, Jesus, for uniting your life with mine. Thank you for giving your life so that I might be forgiven, that I might be reconciled to God and to my fellow men. We can partake of that and say, this is the blessing I was designed for. No greater love has ever been demonstrated than Jesus coming to die for you and for me. But will we accept it and accept the offer to experience it His way? Will we stand and say, no, I want to hear yes on these things like my daughter did when she was so young? Or will we accept the love and recognize that His ways might not be our ways? Or will we keep wrestling with God? Or maybe just wrestle with life in general, hoping to get a blessing, to earn a blessing, to do enough? Have you been so focused on your plan or the path in front of this blessed life that you think you need to live that you've ignored the creator of life and His blessing that He pronounced before you were ever born? Maybe you've been like Cade, grabbing and tasting all kinds of ingredients that the world has to offer, but never really getting the full experience that you were expecting. Can you turn from your own grasping to turn and follow Jesus? Can you let Him be enough? Can you let His way become your way to live a blessed life? Finally, can you let His Spirit transform, equip, and empower you to live the life He created for you. He has a blessing for you. That blessing has a name, and it's Jesus. He wants to unite His life with ours. Will you let Him? I'd like if you just stand and maybe come to these middle aisle, 2 aisles here, and you'll take the elements from me and then return to your seat. And before you take them, just reflect on this. Pause and think, God, have I been trying to go about it my own way to get the blessing, or am I really sold out to you? Let's be mentally and spiritually prepared to partake of Jesus as an affirmation of the life that we want to live. Whether we decided that 20 years ago, 200 years ago, or 20 seconds ago. If you're seeking Jesus, will you stand and come to these middle aisles and receive the elements?